This week, I'm talking about getting your spouse to cooperate with you or to partner with you on the healing journey. After infidelity, it's not unusual at all for couples to struggle with learning how to work together as a team against infidelity or addiction, where you're a united front working together to some common goal. You're not working against each other. It usually works best when the unfaithful spouse leads the way and is proactive in the recovery journey. If they're the ones that put their arms around the relationship and guard it and protect it, and like I said, lead the way. It's also really common, I get asked certain questions all the time around how do I get my spouse to address their addiction or address this unfaithfulness? How do I get them to partner with me in parenting? How do I get them to be more financially responsible or to help me set up a budget? Also, how do I get them to talk about sexual issues that we may be struggling with? So those are really common questions on how do you work together through infidelity and a host of other things. And on that note, many times hurt spouses want me to be the bad cop, if you will, or they want me to help them motivate their spouse to do the work. And what I tell them all the time is that I can share what the benefits are of healing and what dealing with shame in any trauma or childhood wounds or wounds from the past. But at the end of the day, motivation to do the work, to do good work, has to come from somewhere inside the person. And that's where it's got to start. One reason I get these requests on a host of different issues is because a spouse isn't getting any kind of response or follow through to their requests. And there's this researcher at the University of Texas, his name is Ted Huston, and he conducted a survey years ago with 168 participants over about 15-year period. And he discovered that the biggest predictor of a couple breaking up wasn't conflict, but rather it's the lack of responsiveness. And especially with infidelity, when you ask your spouse to do something and there's this lack of responsiveness, it just adds to the pain that's already there from that rupture in the relationship. And both of you end up feeling more and more alone. And there have been other marital researchers that have looked at this lack of responsiveness and aloneness. Ted Huston, John Gottman, Sue Johnson, just to name a few. And in the long run, what we know is that we want to matter to our spouse. And all of this is true no matter which role you play in the recovery journey from infidelity. Because when we don't respond, it can make us feel insignificant, unimportant, and unloved. And the other reason why I often get questions about finances or sex or in-laws or children, the raising and discipline of them, is because they're the big four topics that almost every couple wrestles with throughout their relationship at one time or another. If you or your spouse disagree regarding any of the big four, that's what we call these topics, or if they have a problem with addiction, you'll want to be able to address these important issues together. And of course, you're not responsible for making them do the right thing. The purpose of these conversations is to show that you're invested in the relationship and that you're interested in their inner world and what's going on with them. And so that you can then partner together in what's best for both of you. And sometimes a change in how you approach them can motivate them to do something that's helpful, that's loving and respectful in the long run, and that you'll both want. So it might seem pretty random, but bear with me. I love horses, and I have loved them since I was a little boy. I plan on even starting an equine-assisted therapy training later this year here in Colorado. I see horses are these majestic, sentient beings with feelings, and they're capable of deep communication. They're full of emotion and memories, and they are profoundly empathic creatures. When I was a kid growing up in Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, my older brother Bill had a horse, and a lot of his friends had a horse, but I had a Shetland pony, and her name was Sugarfoot. Sugarfoot was abandoned by her previous owners, And my dad relented and let me and my little brother keep her. And she was awesome. And if you know anything about horses, or particularly Shetland ponies, they are temperamental. And there are days where she was sweet, and then there are days where you were not riding her because she didn't want to be ridden, and she was the boss. But there are days that she was so much fun to be with. She was patient, she was content, she loved to be brushed. I loved brushing her, I loved just hanging out with her. Then years later, I was at an equine assisted therapy workshop for therapists, and I worked with this horse named Rocky. And that horse saw right through me. And if you have any childhood wounds, or if you are a trauma survivor, I can't say strongly enough, go do at least one session with an equine assisted therapist and do a piece of work and see what happens. I think I did 6 months of work with that one horse in about a 2-hour time period. It was amazing. But over the years, through my experiences with Sugarfoot and Rocky, I found that some of the practices that work with horses and people don't really differ that much. And mostly what I'm talking about there is presence, being present, and a deep sense of generous listening. I think those two go hand in hand. You know, and there's this old saying that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And likewise, you or I can show your spouse a plan for health and for healing, but you can't make them choose it. You just can't do it. They got to want to do it. You can, however, gain peace by knowing that you are acting out of honor and respect and love and in their best interest, rather than out of fear or control, regardless of how it's perceived. When talking with your spouse about your needs for the relationship, I recommend a 3 simple step approach. It may or may not have the outcome you desire, but I've seen it help other couples over the years, and I think it might help you too. Step 1 is just ask. Ask your spouse what you would like them to do. Make a request. It's like with a horse. If you would give a verbal request, such as making that kissing sound, a signal to go or to stop, it's like that. If you and your horse are on the same page, then that's all it takes to get them to cooperate. It's a request. Starting at any other place besides making the request doesn't honor the relationship. And the same is true when we speak to our spouse. When you don't ask your spouse to do what you need, it robs them of the opportunity to give you a gift. And it robs you of knowing that they want to do something, then they're doing it because you're making them or controlling them. This is a really, really important place, and it's a really important first step, is just to make that request. Again, their response may not be what you desire, but at least you know you communicated respectfully. Oftentimes, we assume our spouse won't do the right thing. Sometimes that assumption is based on experience. But if they're trying, if they're working a good program, give them the opportunity to do it differently now with all the things that they're learning. That was the way they did it before, and maybe they'll do it differently and better now. Give them a chance by asking for what you need. If they don't want to respond to your request, then here's the way I see it. You have 2 options. You can decide that what you're requesting really isn't that important and you can move on. Or you can tell them now what you need rather than ask for it. And that's step number 2, telling them. You know, too much asking and not enough telling is one of the best ways to confuse a horse. When I tell the horse to do something, I give them a nudge with my heels and have a firm voice. If you simply just ask the horse, it may not get the request and not something that needs to be done. By continuing only to ask your spouse to act, it may not communicate the importance of what you need. It may also leave you both feeling frustrated and discouraged or defeated. If something is really important to you, then you need to be willing to tell your spouse it's what you need. Please, 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 please don't expect them to read your mind. I hear this almost every day because most likely they're not very good at it. I'm not good at reading minds. I don't think you are either. I don't think any of us are very good at reading minds. For many, it feels like the wrong thing to do to tell your spouse that what we need and what we want. We tell ourselves that it won't mean as much if I have to tell them. And that's really just not true. Occasionally, I hear things like, it's not loving to ask or tell my spouse what I need them to do, because if we really loved each other, wouldn't we be willing to accept each other just the way we are? And the answer to that is it just depends on whether the behavior is harmful or hurtful or not. That's the litmus test for this. It's not fair to dissect or criticize your spouse's personality just because you're in pain. If their actions are what's causing you the pain, then most certainly you have a right and a need to speak up. We need to be able to speak the truth honorably, respectfully, and in love. But often we resist telling our spouse what we need because of the false sense of belief that if they loved us, they'd know what we need. And trust me when I say that you and your spouse are two very different people with two very different experiences, and there will be times when you just don't think alike. And according to John Gottman, that may be up to about 70% of the time that we're not on the same page, that we disagree, or we don't know how to move forward, or the plan forward is totally different. That's common and normal. I want to normalize that because it really is common. But give your spouse a chance to do the right thing by speaking up and telling them what you need. When telling your spouse something important like this, the truth needs to be spoken respectfully and honorably. It shouldn't be a personal attack. You need to be able to clearly state what you desire. For instance, if your relationship is struggling and you ask your spouse to go to counseling with you, but they refuse, then you've got to tell them what you need. Asking would sound like this: would you please go to counseling with me? I'd really like to do that for us. If the answer is no, then you can turn up the volume. And that would sound like telling them. And that would sound something like this. You could put it in your own words. But because I love you and I want to co-create a better us, I need you to go to counseling with me. It's not a question. It's a statement. It's a good idea to begin with a positive statement, but it's imperative that you end with what you need. It doesn't have the word, I wish we would, or would you please. It just says, here's what I want. It's a statement. Telling means speaking clearly about what is important to you. And I love the words of Brene Brown. She says that clear is kind. Try to avoid the word you in the statements when addressing your spouse. Instead, stick with I and what you want, and that you're going to go and what you're going to do. And tell your spouse that you want them to join you. And remember that clear and simple and short is kind. And the third step is demand. And this is a hard one. Some of you may not believe that you have the right to demand your spouse to do anything. And I'm not suggesting that you rob them of your choice. What I believe firmly is that we all have free will and choice at the end of the day. That's true about every one of us. I'm simply just saying that you have a choice. And it's far more loving to inform your spouse of your intention to use that choice rather than allowing them to continue in a pattern that's destructive to you or to them or to the relationship. I want to be really clear that this is not a step to use when you have a differing opinion. The demand is reserved at a last resort when your spouse's behavior continues to be harmful, either to you or them or the relationship. A demand is going to sound something like this. If you don't stop seeing your affair partner, then you're going to have to move out. If you don't stop seeing your affair partner, then I'm going to move out. There's some consequence to an action. The consequence has to be tied to a demand, or else it carries no weight. And the way I see this is really good boundary setting. You're not placing a boundary on them. The boundary is for you, that here's a behavior, and this is what I'm going to do for me if that doesn't stop. Demand isn't a threat or a means to control your spouse. It's telling your spouse what you're going to do if something doesn't change or if they don't respond in a better way. It's a warning and an attempt to break a cycle. They still have a choice. I believe that firmly. It's just that now they're aware of the consequences of their choice. And if demanding has any motive other than love, then it's the wrong motive. And in my opinion, this step should be reserved for when all other efforts have been exhausted. They need to know that you're doing this, making this demand because you love and you care for them, not just yourself. A demand is sometimes effective when you're dealing with infidelity, abuse, or addiction. And it can show that you love your spouse too much to allow them to continue the destructive pattern. Again, you're not responsible for making your spouse do the right thing, or you're not responsible for their choices. They have to want to save themselves and this relationship just as much as you do. If you're the betrayed spouse and you're struggling with how to make requests or speaking up and telling your partner what you need, or even making a demand in a good and healthy way, I would encourage you to check out the Harboring Hope course at the Affair Recovery website. You'll find a safe place to heal from infidelity and develop community with others walking this same path and begin to rebuild confidence and even a new life with or without your spouse. Harboring Hope may be the best gift that you can give yourself. Just earlier today, I had a client tell me how helpful that course had been for her already, and she's only 3 weeks into it. She went on to say how it was helping her express her anger in a more healthy way and to get better and better about setting clear boundaries for herself and speaking up and telling her partner what she needed from him. So I hope you'll check it out at affairrecovery.com. Thanks so much for joining me. It is always good to be with you. I'll be back again next week. And until then, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you then.